Donald Trump has been restored to the Colorado ballot after the Supreme Court rejected the notion that he was accountable for the Capitol riots on January the 6th. Jon Sopel joins me to talk about this, broadcaster and co-host of the News Agents podcast and the News Agents USA, joins us from Washington. Jon, take us back, put this into the context in which it lies.
So there was an attempt in Colorado to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Why? Because they said he was an insurrectionist. And then they looked back at the kind of amendments that have taken place to the US Constitution. And they alighted on the 14th Amendment, which dates back to just after the American Civil War, when there was a worry that people who had led the secession so that states would separate and break up the US of A shouldn't be able to hold office if they had tried to break up America in the first place. And they tried to use this 14th Amendment to justify their decision about why Donald Trump, post January the 6th, 2021, should not be allowed to run for the presidency. And I always thought this case would go nowhere because there are 9 members of the Supreme Court. Do the 9 members of the Supreme Court want to be deciding who should run for office and who shouldn't? It's for the people to decide. And it was telling today that although the court has a 6-3 small c conservative majority, all 9 justices voted to say, you know what, it's you, the people, who decide the outcome of elections, not us, the Supreme Court justices.
And yet, presumably, there are rules about who can and can't stand in elections still in America, are there? And this was deemed by those chancing their arm, to be a good enough reason to wield that amendment.
Look, it would have been a different story if Donald Trump had been convicted of insurrection for January the 6th. And there is a whole separate Supreme Court hearing on that question about whether he has immunity from prosecution owing to him being the president at the time when this all happened. So there are cases that are still being brought, but Donald Trump has not been tried for causing an insurrection or of breaking the law, or whether he can be tried for it. So for the Supreme Court to have intervened now would have seemed to me an enormous power grab by the justices. And the history in America is that the justices don't want to be playing that role. And it would have been, can you imagine the chaos for a moment if Colorado's decision was allowed to stand, that Donald Trump couldn't stand for election in Colorado, but he could in neighbouring Utah or wherever it happens to be. It would have been chaos. And I think that would have led to great instability. And I think it's really striking. I've read a number of Supreme Court justice rulings in my years sort of covering North America. This one says there's Amy Coney Barrett, who was the last Supreme Court justice to be appointed by Donald Trump, who says, look, guys, this is from all 9 of us. This isn't just the conservatives saying this. Please, the American people know we are absolutely united on this. Because, of course, in America, there is so much that divides people. But on this particular point, there is no division.
And how will Donald Trump, in your view, utilise this? Because he will, won't he?
Donald Trump is having a splendid couple of weeks. Last week, the Supreme Court said about whether he could be tried for this, that they would look at the case, but they would take their time. They're not going to start reviewing it until late April. We won't get a decision from the Supreme Court until late June about whether Donald Trump, does have immunity from this federal prosecution, which would be a hugely serious trial just before the election. In effect, the Conservative majority has kicked this into the long grass. So Donald Trump's legal problems, the hurdles that have been there in front of him, are gradually disappearing. And I think you're seeing now the stage being set that it will be Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, that the courts are not going to upend him or trip him over before November the 5th. And so therefore, I think you are going to see Donald Trump winning the Republican nomination in the next few days, possibly, and also then becoming their nominee for the presidential election in November.
And I noticed you didn't say what you think about the Democratic nomination yet.
I was at a dinner the other night. Yeah, I was at a dinner the other night in Washington, and I was back catching up with a lot of well plugged in people who know the White House extremely well and what's happening in Biden land. And they were saying there is zero chance that it won't be Biden unless God intervenes and takes the 81-year-old president away from us, because he is determined. He is ignoring the polls. The polls are absolutely terrible for him at the moment. But they also say, look, forget opinion polls. When there has been an election, and there was one in New York quite recently, the Democrats are doing pretty well in real polling, for a number, not to do with Joe Biden, probably, but to do with the fact that, they've overturned the abortion laws in America, which has caused huge controversy and is nothing like as popular as Republicans hoped it would be, and is costing them dearly. They look at the economy, which is improving and doing very well, certainly compared to the UK economy. And Biden is hoping that come November, there'll be some political reward as well as economic reward. And that is what they're banking on. But it's a big gamble, because Joe Biden, you feel you are watching getting older. It's like when you've got flowers at home and they start to droop and it kind of goes, oh, right, he's time to throw them out.
He's the tulip
and Joe Biden
president.
Doesn't want to go anywhere.
The tulip president.
Exactly.
To fade. And a final word. It's unrelated to the Trump stuff, but I know you'll be keeping an eye on it as well. Benny Gantz is in America. He's meeting Kamala Harris. Biden and Netanyahu. I mean, we know they don't get along famously. We know that Biden has said, now, it needs to be now, this ceasefire, we need to get progress. If that doesn't happen, how much does that weaken Biden, do you think?
Well, I think Biden is in a very difficult position, and I think that the whole nature of the debate in the United States over Israel has shifted fundamentally since October the 7th. And I think that among young people and Arab Americans, there has been a significant shift. And, if I was to take one step, you're asking me about the presidential election. I don't see that there is a path for Joe Biden to win unless he wins Michigan. Michigan has got a very high Arab American population, far bigger than the majority who won the state by back in 2020. Young people on university campuses, their attitudes have changed towards Israel. So I think that Biden is in a terribly difficult position. And that's why, just as Keir Starmer in London is under pressure to toughen his line on Israel, so the same is happening to Joe Biden here in Washington. And you've seen a toughening of the line, but you kind of know that Netanyahu is going to say, I'm ignoring you, I'm going to carry on. Does it reach a stage where Joe Biden comes out of the White House and says, Benjamin Netanyahu, you have to resign. You no longer have the confidence of the United States of America with all that goes with that. That would be a momentous move. It may not lead to Netanyahu's fall, but it will add to the sense of pressure on him. And America are considering how they can bring more pressure to bear on the Israeli leader.
That's fascinating, and you'd have to ask the degree to which Benny Gantz's visit is part of that potential route.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.